All right, let's get into chapter 3, section 2. We're talking about the pharaohs, Egypt's powerful kings and queens. So we're looking at a statue here, yes. And this is actually, it looks like a powerful king of ancient Egypt. And indeed, it is definitely a powerful pharaoh. But there's something wrong with the face. You see, there's a woman behind that beard. So pharaohs oftentimes were portrayed in sculpture and in pictures with that beard. And so even if they were a woman and they were pharaoh, they would be pictured with that beard, which is a little strange, but that's good. Not to them. The woman is Hatshepsut, and she ruled Egypt during the New Kingdom, which, by the way, is not even close to the Old Kingdom, right? So a lot of time passed, she's like not so ancient history, but we still think we jumble it all together in our brains. And it seems like she lived in the early times, like new Stone Age villages, and she didn't. She was living in the not so ancient history. Okay, we'll get to more dates later. But she, Hatshepsut, was a bold leader who led her army into battle when enemies threatened Egypt's borders. But she's most known for creating a time of great peace and economic success. She encouraged trade with faraway places, sending a famous expedition to the land of Punt on the east coast of Africa. Egyptian traders returned with shiploads of ivory and gold and spices, all to her glory. Hatshepsut wasn't the only woman to rule Egypt. Maybe you can think of some like Cleopatra, but she had that respected title, Pharaoh or king, traditionally referred to a man. For this reason, Hatshepsut appears here with the clothing and symbols of a pharaoh, a male pharaoh, beard and all. Hatshepsut declared herself Pharaoh of Egypt in 1503. That's right, she declared herself. And turn my alarm off, or that's going to scare us. And so she was supposed to be helping out her stepson, but she was doing such a great job. She thought, I can do this without him. And so she ruled with shrewdness. She's a very tough leader. We're talking 1503 BCE. It sounds like that should be ancient times, but when we figure we started talking about Egypt as early as 3,800 BC, 4,000 BCE, it's not that ancient, but still ancient. All right. This is not the time of the pyramids. Like, no, we're later than all that, which is just funky. It messes with our brains. Okay. So Hatshepsut wasn't the only woman. Okay, we talked about Pharaoh being traditionally a king or a leader of ancient Egypt. Could be male or female, didn't matter. Egypt's god kings. Hatshepsut was one of many famous Egyptian pharaohs to rule Egypt. Some, like her, were wise, but others were careless and cruel. Egypt's fortunes rested on the strength of its pharaohs. They really wanted them to be good so that good things would happen. From dynasty to dynasty. I mean, get a little breakdown here of Old Kingdom. Told you there'd be dates. So 2700 BCE to 2200 BCE is the Old Kingdom. And then the New Kingdom, 2000 BCE to 1800 BCE. Middle Kingdom. And then the New Kingdom is 1600 BCE to 1100 BCE. The history of the ancient Egypt is the history of its dynasties. A dynasty is a series of rulers from the same family. Now we have a definition. So in the early times in Mesopotamia, we didn't see this, right? Whoever was the best, most competent person would be the next leader, chosen by the previous king. But eventually Mesopotamia moved its way into dynasties, and where an adult is going to pass it on to their child. And in Egypt, we see that as well. So Egypt had 31 dynasties, 31 families that ruled until it was conquered by the Greek ruler Alexander the Great in 332 BCE. And that's an important date. We don't memorize a lot of dates in history class just because it's hard to keep track of them all. But that's an important one because it changes things, especially for the Egyptians. Historians group Egypt's dynasties into three main time periods called kingdoms. The earliest time period is the Old Kingdom. That's 27 to 2200 BC. Next is the Middle Kingdom. That's 2000 to 1800 BC. And then We have the latest time period called the New Kingdom, 16 to 1100 BCE. The timeline shows the dates of each. Remember, these kingdoms aren't places, they're time periods, which just typically we don't think about time periods as being kingdoms. We think about places, like a king is in charge of a kingdom, not a time. All right, the gaps between the kingdoms were times of trouble. So we know that sometimes things break down. There are wars, there are invasions, there are weak rulers, and just like the country kind of ceases to exist as a united country for a while. And that happened a couple of times throughout ancient Egypt's history. And they were rare because we just saw two gaps, right? For most of ancient Egyptian history, there was stable rule. Stable rule. They're pretty peaceful. Don't have to worry about invasions like other ancient civilizations did. No Nile River flooding coming to kill them all in their sleep like we saw in the Tigris and Euphrates. So things are a lot more peaceful there. According to legend, Egypt's first dynasty began when a king named Menes united Upper and Lower Egypt. Menes built a city named Memphis near the present-day city of Cairo. And from there, he ruled over the two lands, both Upper and Lower Egypt. So carvings from Menes' time show that he wore two crowns. He wore the crown of Upper Egypt and the crown of Lower Egypt. Why not? You own both. Go for it. And it says that the white crown was of Upper Egypt and the red crown was of Lower Egypt. The uniting of Egypt began one of the most stable civilizations in history. Thanks, Menes, I guess. It lasted more than 2,500 years. But Menes was killed by a hippopotamus, which is very sad, but also kind of interesting. Here's a plaque from his reign from 3000 BCE, and it's glorifying him. On the left, you see Menes. He's the tallest one in the picture because he's the most important, not because he actually was physically taller than the other people in the picture. That's just how ancient art sometimes works, and in this case it does. And then on the right side, you see some people without heads. Well, they do have heads, but they're between their feet. So he was looking over these beheaded people victoriously. I did it, he's thinking. Ugh. Oh, Menes. He's a meanie. All-powerful pharaohs. The pharaohs had absolute power over their people, so whatever they said, that was it. So unlike Hammurabi's code, where there were laws and they were in writing and the king even had to abide by them. So if you did this thing, this was your punishment. In Egypt, if the pharaoh says you did this thing, so this is your punishment. Okay, but you did this thing and that was your punishment. That's up to the pharaoh because no one can argue with him or her because the pharaoh has absolute rule. Whatever the pharaoh decided was law. He could change the law or she at any time. He decided when the fields would be planted. He received crops from the workers on his estates. The pharaoh was also the religious leader of the country. It was the pharaoh, Egyptians believed, who provided his people with the Nile's yearly floods and harvests that followed. As one official wrote, he's the god Ra, whose beam enabled us to see. He gives more light to the two lands than the sun's disk. He makes the earth more green than the Nile's flood. He's filled the two lands with strength and life. 2,000 years of power. Egypt grew and prospered during its first 6 dynasties, and this included the Old Kingdom. It was blessed with able rulers and a well-run system of government. The pharaohs kept the peace and trade with Nubia, with only occasional conflicts. They sent merchants to the eastern coast of the Mediterranean to find timber. This timber was used to build houses and boats and furniture. Egyptian merchants may have traveled north across the Mediterranean Sea in search of other trade items. We know they had sailboats, so. About 2250 BCE, near the end of the Old Kingdom, governors in the provinces began to challenge the power of the pharaoh's government. Whoa. Egypt's unity then crumbled and the dynasties grew weak. The early dynasties of the Middle Kingdom restored order and reunited the country. With calmer times, the pharaohs spent the nation's wealth on work such as irrigation projects instead of on wars. They built canals between the Nile and the Red Sea. Egypt grew rich. However, less able rulers then followed, and the country lost control of itself to foreign invaders. Egyptian princes became strong enough to then drive out the foreign invaders. And around 1550 BC, we mark the New Kingdom. The first pharaohs of the New Kingdom weren't content to just drive out their foreign invaders, however. They decided they were going to build an empire like the Assyrians had, or the Babylonians at that point. And so pharaohs created huge armies of foot soldiers, mounted warriors and war chariots. Bronze swords and body armor made the Egyptians nearly unbeatable. They're taking their show on the road, which is kind of silly because their geography is much better. A powerful queen, a great pharaoh. So back to Hatshepsut. Around 1500 BCE, a child named Thutmose III became pharaoh. Because of his youth, his stepmother was appointed regent. A regent is someone who rules for a child until the child is old enough to rule for themselves. The stepmother was Hatshepsut. We read about her at the beginning of the section. Not content to just be regent, Hatshepsut had herself proclaimed pharaoh. She ruled Egypt for the next 22 years. Hatshepsut's reign was good for Egypt. It was. She apparently enjoyed her power too. When Thutmose grew up, she refused to yield the throne to him. He took over when she died and had all of her statues destroyed. He went on a little statue demolition project. We don't know if he had a hand in her death. Actually, we do. She was not killed by him. So this is old. Thutmose III was one of the greatest pharaohs of the New Kingdom. So if you're mad at him for being a spoiled child, well, the truth is when he became pharaoh, he did a great job. He led his army in wars against Syria and Phoenicia in Southwest Asia. We know where those places are. Egyptian troops advanced as far east as the Euphrates River and south into Nubia. Yet Thutmose was more than a conqueror. He was an educated man who loved to study plants. And like most rulers of his time, he treated the people he defeated with mercy. Here's Hatshepsut's temple. The New Kingdom began to decline around 1075 BCE. Civil war left Egypt weak and poorly defended. The mighty kingdom fell to the famous conqueror Alexander the Great in 332 BCE, as we know. Cleopatra ruled from 51 to 30 BCE. This Egyptian carving shows her with Isis, a popular Egyptian goddess. Cleopatra, however, wasn't content to just be queen of Egypt. She wanted to rule Rome too, and she almost succeeded. She gained so much influence in Rome that her likeness appears on Roman coins. It's a pretty big deal. About 300 years after Alexander the Great, Egypt was conquered by another powerful civilization in the ancient world, the Romans. This is Cleopatra's time, right? And so Egypt became part of the Roman Empire. It would not govern itself for almost 2,000 more years. So Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of Egypt. They're conquered by the Romans and then eventually by the British. And they don't rule themselves again for a while. All right, so that's it for today, and I will see you later. Bye.